spiritual perspective.
Okay. About why why homosexuality would be sin. I would disagree with exactly how he put it up there, but one of the arguments that's made in Scripture for why homosexuality is wrong is because it is denying that which God created.
The spiritual aspect, please.
You're going to have to define what you mean by spiritual.
The underlying issue, like the reason for having idolatry is because we don't want anything to separate us between God, our connection with. Yes, it states in the fundamental perspective that idolatry is money. Like, as an example, money can be seen as idolatry. But can you give me like the root issue?
The root issue is people worshiping the creature rather than the creator. That they're putting themselves in the place of God, deciding for themselves what is right, and ignoring what God has created and what God has defined, because He's God. He is the author of this world. He is the creator of it. He has creator's rights. He has authority. He is the one who defines what right behavior is and what wrong behavior is. In terms of a spiritual answer, I'm not quite sure. We live out our lives in this moment. We make choices. Those choices have implications. Are we living in rebellion against God, or are we judging for ourselves what is right behavior?
Reverend Mullins. Since we can't all agree with the subjective experiences, or we can't all see your side of view or your point of view through your subjective experiences, is there any way that you could give biblical evidence, either whether or not homosexuality is a sin and specific biblical references to it being a sin or to it not being a sin, and then what action we should take based on those references?
Okay, I'll do my best on that one. First of all, there is no place in Scripture that I can point to and say, this is the Scripture that says that it's cool for gay people to marry. That doesn't exist because they had no concept of that. So there's no simple, direct relationship in Scripture. We're left to do that interpreting. I can say that as far as the prohibitions in Scripture, good scholarship has debunked all of those. I didn't take the time tonight to try to look at them. Some of what was said about Corinthians and the words that are in Corinthians that describe homosexuals aren't actually translated as homosexuals in earlier translations into English. Furthermore, the meaning of those words is highly debated. The only times they're used in Scripture is those two instances he cited. So what they mean, we don't really know, because they're listed in sin lists, so we don't even have context. So ultimately what I would say is the way that we see this as a Christian thing is what characterizes Christian love. That's why I talked about a Christian gay marriage being one that involves worship and spurring one another on in the Lord and doing these things that characterize a holy kind of love. And that to me then begins to give a picture of what gay marriage would look like. It looks like two people that love God and love each other, and by that not putting the flesh before God, putting God first in their relationship together as they seek to live a holy life together. It's not about putting ourselves before God. It's about getting a partner on our journey that can actually make us get closer to God because of their experience being combined with ours, so that we can get even a bigger picture of who God can be in the world.
This is a question for both. There were examples in the Bible of when the nations of Israel and Judah condoned behaviors that were defined by God as sin. Some of this was idol worship, which involved homosexuality also. And God judged these nations. They were taken into exile. The people faced starvation. And this was something that happened not only to the people who were partaking, but also to people who were not. It was kind of like a diffuse effect. If in this country, things that are defined by God as sin are condoned, is it reasonable to think that perhaps this nation could be judged by, I don't know what?
Could you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. I think I understood. You understood? Okay.
I'm good.
Did
Go ahead.
Well, I would say that the world has already been judged but it was judged at the cross, which is a good thing. That the wrath of God for human sin was poured out on Jesus Christ. But there will continue to be rebellion, and there will be judgment on that. I'm not in the place of God to say exactly how he's going to do this, what the role of the United States is in this. I do know that Romans passage is very sobering, because one of the judgments that God lays down is he gives people over to their sin. He says, this is what you want to do? Go for it, reap the consequences of it. I think that is the most immediate concern I would have for where we're going right now as a country. God says, go ahead and do this. Sow the wind, reap the whirlwind.
I would say the same thing. I just would pick out different things. I would say that the love in the world is not the threat. But I would say that our materialism, that our hypersensitivity to the way our bodies should look, that these things are threats to our society, that we begin to set things that are wrong, that are absolutely against Christian teaching as our priorities in our society. Those are threatening, I think. But two people loving each other and spurring one another on in God, that doesn't seem to be threatening to me. I, like you, don't know what that means in terms of judgment of God or any of those things, because every country has its own problems and its own ways that it could theoretically experience the judgment of God. But ultimately, to me, this is not the issue that would bring any kind of judgment, if there was an issue that would.
Gentleman on the left.
Dr. Miles and Reverend Mullins, this is a question for both of you. Using your hermeneutical understanding of the Old Testament, actually of the story of Sodom, I would like you both to respond to what are the implications of the whole story of Sodom in the Old Testament? What are its implications into the New Testament, and those implications into marriage? And Dr. Miles, if you would begin, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. The story of Sodom, of course, is about the messengers of God, who are the angels of God, the Lord, who shows up in the city and meets to rescue Lot. All the men of the city apparently rise up and they want to have sex with them. Lot refuses to do that. Strangely, and again, I think this is description, not prescription. He offers his daughters, but that was not good enough for them. So this is clearly an act of violence. It is homosexual rape. What's interesting, though, is that the homosexual aspect of it can't be ignored. What made it even worse than rape was homosexual rape. Perhaps even for the reasons that Wes described about I'm going to exercise my authority over you by treating you as a woman, sort of thing. We might even agree on that about what made that particularly heinous. But the aspect, the homosexual aspect of it, I don't think can be ignored. Jesus goes on and describes other cities who were denying the revelation of them. It's at Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida, these places where he was, he taught, he lived, and he says that here I am with you, and you are ignoring me. You're denying who I am. It will be better on the day of Sodom, or it will be better for Sodom on the day of judgment than it will be for you. Sodom is, and Jesus is speaking here, saying, you know how evil Sodom was, but it's going to be better on Judgment Day for you, or for them than it will be for you.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misunderstandings of all time is that Sodom has anything to do with homosexuality. The fact that homosexuality is present doesn't mean that it's the issue. If sexual ethics were the issue of the story, where's the sexual ethics around the rape? The suggested rape of these women. Interestingly, if you don't know, in Judges 19, the Sodom story is retold again. Perhaps a different story, but it's really, really similar. This time, the women actually are raped and killed, and that's prescribed as somehow right. And then we get that this is not prescriptive but descriptive, and I don't know how we can tell the difference and why our hermeneutic gets to do that. Ultimately, though, Jesus does cite this passage in Sodom, so does Jeremiah and Ezekiel. All of them cite the sin of Sodom as something other than homosexuality. For them, it's about this dehumanization of the men, about inhospitality, improper treatment of a stranger. A theme throughout all of Scripture is the appropriate way to interact with a stranger. And so for Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and for Jesus in both Matthew and in Luke, when they cite this passage, it's about the proper treatment of strangers, not about homosexuality.
I think this needs to be addressed. Granted, homosexual rape is inhospitable. I will grant that. But to ignore homosexual...
Sorry, I don't...
But to ignore the homosexual aspect of this is I think is irresponsible. Furthermore, the passages in Ezekiel do refer, I believe, back to homosexuality because they call what went on in Sodom as an abomination. That same exact language is used in Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, describing these men who lie with men as an abomination. It's the exact same
Actually,
word.
Ezekiel says, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. That's what Ezekiel says.
That's one verse in Ezekiel. It also speaks to Ezekiel 16:50, 18:12. It does use the word abomination.
But not homosexual.
Gentlemen, we'll need to move on. I do want to make the announcement that these will be our last 3 questions.
Question for Dr. Miles. If there's anything the Bible teaches us that God has shown us, it's that injustice, unfairness, treating people indifferently, referring some to others, is one of the most horrible things we can do. You, no matter how you put it, you claim and you get to enjoy the legal protections of a relationship with your wife. You claim gays cannot. How can you possibly justify this as being right?
Because God has defined what marriage is, and it is not up for us to define what it is. As to equal protection under the law, civil rights, all of that sort of thing, very important, but they are not unqualified. They are not unqualified. Marriage, any commitment to marriage, or by a society or by the church, cannot ignore the structures